Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend this next hour together. And I do sincerely hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family, because you really do matter. Which leads me to my opening observations. You see, the life of Jacob Blake really matters. The condition that he is in after being shot 7 times by a police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin, is problematic and troubling and heartbreaking for his family. And as a Black man, I feel that he's family. So it's heartbreaking for me too. But I think the best way to express the care and concern that all of us should display and have for Jacob Blake and other Black men and women who have come into harm's way because of violence, whether it's from the hands of a police officer or brother to brother, is to hear how Julia Jackson, the mother of Jacob Blake, responds to the shooting of her son. Listen.
Do Jacob justice on this level and examine your hearts.
Yes.
We need healing. As I pray for my son's healing, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, I also have been praying, even before this, for the healing of our country.
Julia Jackson, the mother of Jacob Blake, giving tonight's opening observations. Certainly what she says is something we can all appreciate and hopefully understand, and join her in prayer for her son and for this nation. We'll be back with my interview with Dr. Benjamin CHAVIS after this. Joining me now, I'm delighted to bring on Dr. Benjamin CHAVIS. He is the president and CEO of the National Newspapers Publishers Association, the Black Press USA. And Doc, there's a lot going on. I want to top the day off in terms of what's happening, what we saw unfold with the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks in particular, protesting the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha.
Yes.
And I thought it was strong what they did, and the NBA, the other teams following suit with that. Well, what's your opinion of that, and how's the Black press covering that?
Well, the Black press, we're definitely covering, and we are getting the news stories, behind-the-scenes stories of these Black athletes. These young men are not only champions on a basketball court, they're champions in their community. And when the community suffers, they're not going to go out there and play as if the community is not suffering. So I think it was this wasn't symbolism. This was reality check that NBA African-American players, the leaders of the league, keep in mind, there would be no NBA without Black basketball players. Mm-hmm. There would be no NFL without Black football players. There would be no Major League Baseball without Black and brown players. So the thing is, these athletes are making a statement that it's time to end systemic racism. There's a debate about whether or not it exists. Well, everyone knows it exists. The question, what are we going to do about it? I'm reminded of John Carlos and Thomas Smith at the Mexico Olympics in 1968, when they just raised their fists. People say, why do athletes do that? This is the Olympics. And when Muhammad Ali took his stand, I think that when Jackie Robinson took his stand. So there's a tradition, that's the point I'm trying to make, Kelly, of Black athletic leaders taking a point position when it comes to saying no to racism, saying no to injustice, saying no to inhumanity. So we salute the Bucks. We salute Doc Rivers. We salute LeBron James. We salute all of them who have taken this act. And the Black press, yes, we're doing feature stories on these athletes and their families, because all of them emerge out of situations where they're doing well athletically, but when the community is not doing well, they almost have an obligation and to speak out. And that's what we are witnessing now. And it's amazing that on some networks, I'm glad the Black News Channel, the Kelly Wright Show, is covering this, because some network television is attacking the players for taking a stance. When in fact, when Carpenter took that knee, it was not against the flag. It was a knee against police brutality. You know, and so people must, and now in the digital bubble where the NBA players are playing, on the court, they have printed Black Lives Matter. I mean, we're trying to put it into America's face. It's on the streets, it's on basketball courts, it's on our uniforms. We're trying to do everything we can to say, hey, America, yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we're also in the middle of an epidemic of systemic racism.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of courage to do what they're doing. And for those who criticize them, I would say walk in our shoes as Black men. It's a different picture. Now,
and also the sisters, I don't know if you heard the WB, the women basketball are also protesting. So it's men and women in athletic sports in all venues who are standing together, standing in solidarity in the wake of the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the wake of the tragic murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. The list just goes on and on. But I think Black athletes are saying our collective cups have run over. We're not taking it anymore. We're taking a stand.
And your response or your reaction to the fact that a 17-year-old white teenager armed and then opening fire on protesters during a peaceful protest.
That just shows you that white supremacy is not something for just limited to people who are elders. White supremacy starts at a very early age. So what we're witnessing, that there are teenage armed white supremacists that will do bodily harm to Black people. That's what we're witnessing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. God bless.
Back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So I'm joined by my West Coast connection. I love saying that. It's Timothy Allen Simon, who of course is an attorney, and he's the chairman of the California Black Chamber of Commerce, as well as the owner of TAS Strategies. And then my good friend Mark Harris, who is a civil rights attorney with the Ben Crump Law Firm, operating there out of Sacramento, California. Gentlemen, welcome to the program again.
Thank you.
Good to have you. We're talking about the RNC, but before we drill down on the RNC and what came out of last night through the mouth of Vice President Mike Pence, let's talk about what's happening in Kenosha. Very disruptive, very concerning in the wake of what happened to Jacob Blake and then the killing of two men by a white teenager, 17 years of age, who was armed and ready there with a militia. Mark, let me begin with you, because your colleague Ben Crump was on and stating that the family of Jacob Blake wants peace, and peace seems to be difficult to get in the streets right now.
You know, I first again thank you, Kelly, for having Timothy and myself. We always appreciate the chance to bring the California connection to your viewers. The reason I wasn't with you yesterday is I was in a meeting with my colleague, Ben Crump. We were talking about what's happening. There have been a number of lawyers on television purporting to represent one aspect of the family or another. And of course, Attorney Simon knows this. When you have multiple parties, in this case, you have the young man himself, Mr. Blake. You have his three children who have separate causes of action for intended, in my opinion, intentional emotional distress, if not negligent emotional distress. You've got all these different parties. You've got parents and you've got family members who were traumatized by what happened. You know, I applaud my colleague, Ben Crum, for being willing to coordinate all of this and to keep it all together. It's going to be multi-parties. It's going to be multi-attorneys. But I was most struck by the words of Ms. Jackson. I thought of you, Kelly, honestly. She said, number one, she's forgiven the officers who did what they did, and she does it in the name of Jesus. I think it's not something that most of us can relate to, how much commitment and strength and faith it takes to be able to forgive someone who did something that's heinous. But there she was on national television with Attorney Crump yesterday and today saying, I forgive the officers who did what they did. Now, we may not want to forgive, but this ain't our thing. This is the mother of young Jacob Blake who was shot. And she said this. I want to reinforce it. I know we'll go to a lot of topics today. We need to regain that. We need to regain faith and humanity. We need to regain the ability to be able to love one another as we love ourselves. I want to start with that, Kelly. I think that her words were perfect as a starting point for me today.
Thank you for that, Mark. And Timothy, that's a hard place to start when we talk about love and forgiveness. A lot of people want to criticize that and actually chastise that kind of sentiment. Yet it really is a hard and difficult and yet courageous thing to do, especially in the wake of what she's just been through, seeing her son shot 7 times in the back.
Yeah, Anglican Bishop Desmond Tutu lectured on the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness is liberating, no matter how at times even humiliating it may seem. It liberates an individual to embrace the higher tiers of humanity, as opposed to what we witnessed, the lower depths of indifference. So I applaud the mother of Mr. Jacobs, because many of us could not do that. Many of us would just want immediate retaliation. And as the book says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. But we cannot ignore the fact that there was an extraordinary demonstration of white privilege when a gentleman who is breaking up an argument or a dispute is shot 7 times in the back, and a young white 17-year-old who gunned down people at a demonstration is arrested peaceably with no injuries inflicted by the officers. One has to, and I'm not an expert on police conduct and the use of force, but it does indeed beg the question. Both, how can you have one? How can a Dylan Roof be apprehended, taken to a Burger King or wherever, this young man apprehended, both who have exercised violent acts? I'm not saying that it should be a tit for tat, that the police should have immediately shot the young man, but now how do you explain shooting a young man 7 times in the back who was breaking up a domestic dispute? So I applaud the Jacobs family. They have clearly shown themselves to be people of faith and people of belief, and wanting this incident to be a learning moment. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the clear and apparent injustice that has occurred.
Yeah, and based upon that, gentlemen, here we find ourselves with a problem, because we have, and we're going to talk about it when we come back after the break, what the RNC has been stating and how that may cause more division, or how do we get healing based on what they've been saying out of the RNC about law and order, with little attention paid to justice and mercy. We're back after this with Timothy Allen Simon and Mark Harris after the break. Welcome back to the program. I'm having my conversation with Timothy Allen Simon and Mark Harris, both attorneys and very successful attorneys operating out of California. And we were just talking in the previous segment about the power of forgiveness coming from the family of Jacob Blake, the young 29-year-old black man shot in the back by police officers as he was going back to his car to get his 3 children and drive away from a situation that had escalated into something he didn't want to be a part of. And yet now he lies in a hospital with paralysis from those gunshots. Thank God he's alive. But I want to talk about something. The RNC, with the exception of one prayer that was done in the opening of an RNC just a couple of nights ago, where the pastor really prayed for the situation in Kenosha, I've heard very little coming from the RNC, with the exception of First Lady Melania Trump saying racism in America is real and we have to do something about it. But nothing from the vice president last night, except violence in the streets has to be stopped, and we are going to have law and order. Did he miss a moment there, gentlemen, or did I miss something?
I think you're right, Kelly. I think that both President Trump and Vice President Pence have missed a moment. You know, one of the things that Mrs. Jackson said, Jacob Blake's mom, she said that these elected officials, both Democrat and Republican, need to set a better example for our country. I think she is dead on right. And I will say that for me, as frustrated as I am, I've gone on the whole range over these past few days, and I've been in this business a long time. This is what I've chosen to do with my life's work: civil rights law, civil rights advocacy, social justice advocacy. I'm not complaining. God has been good to me and my family through this work. But I'll say this, I'm weary. I'm weary, Kelly and Timothy. I'm more weary than anything else. If we don't come up with ways to forcibly bring about a solution to this, and I don't mean by violence in the streets, I'll give you one specific. I think it's time for the Police Officers' Bill of Rights everywhere they exist in this country to be done away with. Timothy pointed out how under our former governor, Gray Davis, the Police Officers Association rose to great prominence in this state, as did all of the other law enforcement related trade associations. Their number one golden goose is the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, which gives them more rights than everyone else. I say, let's level the playing field, do away with giving them uber rights, and instead put them on the same level playing field as everyone else, entitled to equal justice under the law. I think that is something that would get me from the frustrated point to a point of action that I think your viewers should join in on.
I mean, I want to ask, thank you for that, Mark. I want to ask you, you know, we can look to politics and political leaders as being the answer to this problem that we have in America. But really, it's really we, the people, who have to solve this problem, because we can't depend on the president. We can't depend on a possible new president, Joe Biden, with some of his record in terms of being dealt with in terms of Black America and criminal justice. So we find ourselves leaning to the left, leaning to the right. Maybe we need to lean on ourselves. As Bill Withers used to say, lean on me.
I think in terms of Vice President Pence's speech, at a federal facility, by the way, arguably a violation of the Hatch Act, it fell into the lane of the traditional law and order posture of the Republican Party, much of it used to, again, create a dominant position in the southern, what we call today, red states. Mm-hmm. We have to remind ourselves that for many people, you remember the McCloskeys saying that they're going to take away our suburbs. The type of conduct, the type of excessive force that was shown by the officer in Kenosha is what many people believe protects their communities, and as the speakers kept pounding, their way of life. So that's what the Republican Party is doing, despite the pain, the hurt, the suffering, the dissent that's been shown by major professional sports and others. They are still doubling down on the notion that we want law and order. We do not want to see demonstrations. Now, I remind you, a group that they applauded stormed the legislature in the state of Michigan armed. Yeah. We didn't hear any criticism about that. So it's clear that they are targeting one form of protest and yet ignoring the incident that caused the protest. It's not by happenstance, it's by design. They want to be viewed at the ballot box as the party of law and order. As a party of law and order, we are protecting our way of life. This is a very honed and refined message. It's not by any way emotional or accidental. This is a convention. The convention is designed to pull people over to the Republican Party. That's the message that they're banking on.
And here we are dealing with the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic that is now claiming upwards of 180,000 people. We've heard nothing about the plan of attack from the Trump administration or the RNC about how they're going to deal with that. So maybe we'll hear about it tonight. Maybe we'll hear about Jacob Blake, and we'll be discussing this tomorrow. But I thank you both, Timothy Allen Simon, Mark Harris. Appreciate you all, and stay well, stay safe. Praying for you out there in California with those fires.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank
And
you.
prayers to my family and friends in Louisiana who
Absolutely.
so far appear to be safe.
Absolutely. We're back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So joining me now is Star Parker. She is the founder and creator of Cure. And Star, it's good to have you on today. You are a leading conservative among many Americans. And I wanted to ask you about, first, what unfolded at the RNC last night with Vice President Pence accepting the nomination for the Republican Party, and then going into his discourse about being a president of law and order, and juxtapose that against the night before when Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, talked about the fact that racism is real and it has to be dealt with. And so give me your impression of that.
I don't think that those two ideas are contrary to one another. In fact, if we look at the founding principles of the country, you have Christianity, you have capitalism, and you have a constitution. So in Christianity, you have, perhaps you could say, the messaging of Melania. Let's make sure that we understand and appreciate that we're all Americans. We have a couple of problems on the table that are very serious, and we need to work them through together. I thought it most humbling of her and just so fascinating that she would then talk about her introduction to even the Black plight here as an immigrant here. So that's one side of the story. The capitalism side, how do we get to the place to where we understand the role of business and the role of money and the value there without these ideas of redistribution, because redistribution ends up being theft. And then you come to the Constitution, the rule of law, the justice that we say we're looking for. And remember, the scales of justice are judgment and mercy. And I think that that's the balance we're trying to find. But when you have such a disruption in our society as we do right now, with all of this anger in the streets, you have to then look at the judgment side a lot more harshly or directly than the mercy side. Is there a role of mercy in all of this? Absolutely there is. And there is something really wrong that we have to get to as a society to say, wait just a minute. In fact, I was very pleased that the Department of Justice moved so quickly to say, we're looking into this Blake one, because this is not, something's gone really, really wrong. But the folks that are pouring out into the streets, they must get a message clearly that we have a rule of law. We have an organized system to deal with this type of pain. And I think that for the Democrats to not address it, they're doing a disservice, especially during this political time.
Well, I hear what you're saying about the DNC, but the RNC, to some degree, Star, according to critics, have failed to address the fact that white nationalists have also been part of the violence as well. In fact, the arrest of the 17-year-old in shooting people during what was really a peaceful protest the night before, and all of this in the wake of Jacob Blake, and yet we're not hearing anything about that aspect of it. Does that concern you at all? And should the narrative perhaps change with the RNC acknowledging what happened to Jacob Blake, acknowledging that there are bad actors on both sides of the spectrum, and actually bringing that to bear?
The last time the president tried to say that they're good on both sides, they're bad on both sides, the left tore into him over Charlottesville. No, I don't think that he should start to look at, well, let me see what color each of the individuals involved in what we're seeing in this destabilization movement in our country today, what their backgrounds are, what clubs they're members of. No, we're talking now about Americans as a general society addressing some folks that really believe that mob rule is how we're going to get to justice on this very sensitive yet important question. I think that Wright, in fact, the president under his leadership, and as you mentioned earlier, what Vice President Mike Pence addressed in his presentation yesterday was exactly the right tone, because this is not the time to say, well, you did it to us, well, we did it to you, well, these ones came from this club, well, that one came from that club. No, this is not about ethnicity. This is about a mob mentality that's trying to overthrow a civil society. So this is a question of, do we want to live civilly? And from the leadership at the top, I think that the president and the vice president did exactly the messaging necessary.
Star Parker, sticking to her guns and being on this show. I appreciate your comments and your point of view, and certainly all point of views are welcomed on this program. Star Parker, appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you tomorrow about wrapping up the RNC. We'll be back with more after this. And welcome back. Joining me now is ERIKA Savage Wilson. She is the creator and founder of the Savage Politics podcast. And ERIKA, good of you to join us today. You know, you've been following both the DNC and the RNC for many, many years. The message coming out of the RNC last night, what was remarkable to you, or what was concerning to you?
Yeah, good to be with you, Kelly. So I'll start with kind of the incredible piece to me. And I think that was the message that Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence gave. I think that location really didn't matter. He gave a speech from Fort McHenry in Baltimore. And when he said that Trump would continue to defend our heritage, that we won't be silenced, and thinking about kind of the hour that we're in, right, where we all saw George Floyd literally die before our eyes. And then there was this, we're in this period of racial unrest, and that Confederate monuments were being torn down, and, you know, rightfully so. And so for him to say to a crowd of mostly non-Black people, a maskless crowd, that Trump will continue to defend their heritage because the economy is on the ballot and law and order is on the ballot, pretty much told me and many people that I had chatted with after all we needed to know about where this president and where this administration stands, and that it really does not seek to diversify its audience, and that they are really doubling, tripling down on standing with Confederate monuments, even though the general public overall would like to see them removed. And, you know, there are different discussions about should they be placed in a museum or destroyed, what have you. But that was pretty incredible to me that they did that, particularly when we just had a young Black man that was shot 7 times by law enforcement. And then protesters were killed, 2 protesters killed and 1 injured by a white man, white 17-year-old here a couple of days after that. So I think that they're pretty much telling all of us who they are, what they stand for, and what they're going to continue to support. Also found it to be pretty interesting to have the nun present talking about the right to live, so to speak. You had the former coach from Notre Dame that was beloved by many. Talked to a couple of friends who had graduated from Notre Dame, and they were pretty ashamed. They thought that during the time that they were at school, he was a pretty remarkable coach. So I think that you're pretty much seeing folks dig down and support an ideology that really says that unless you are a non-Black person, you are a priority.
How does this country heal the political divide and the racial divide?
You know, that's a 400 years long question, right? I think that what it starts with is real leadership, because when we juxtapose the Obama administration with the current Trump administration, you know, all was not well in the Obama administration, meaning that we were living in a post-racial society. That requires some level of healing, actually dealing in truth. That is a long work ahead of us. But I think that what we cannot continue to do is have people that are in places of leadership, talking about the White House and the Senate, who continue to block legislation, who continue to use their positions of power, their bully pulpit, to stoke the flames of violence and divisiveness. And so that is something that's going to take some time. We may not see it in our lifetime, but to make strides continually with leadership saying that we understand, we hear, that we have a number of issues at hand in this country, but what they can do in a good faith measure is have a cabinet of people of diverse opinions and background, to have people that are willing to sit down at the table, no matter what their party affiliation is, and actually come to agreements that are in the best interest of the people that they represent. To have people that are, you know, in places where they're supposed to be advocating for the good of the people and not lining their pockets. And so when those particular pieces are really worked at from that angle, I do believe that we can continue to walk on the road towards healing. But what we've seen in these past 4 years has definitely been an interruption of that.
A lot of work to be done, ERIKA, on both sides and on all sides. It's all hands on deck to heal these wounds in our nation. I appreciate you being on and sharing your insights about the RNC, just as you did last week with the DNC. And of course, you'll join me tomorrow with our colleague, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, to weigh in on recapping the final week of the RNC, the final day, I should say. Look forward to talking to you then. Thank you for being on.
I appreciate you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thanks, ERIKA. We're back with more after this. So welcome back to the program. I'm delighted to introduce to you once again a guest who's been on this show a couple of times now. He is Bob Woodson, the founder and creator of the Woodson Center that operates here in the nation's capital. And Bob, it's good of you to join us today, especially for such a time as this, what we're encountering in our country right now with regard to all of the things that are going on, conventions from the DNC, the RNC, and then we've got the hurricane sweeping through the Gulf Coast, causing mayhem there. And then there's the hurricane or the storm of racism that we're seeing unfold in Kenosha. And since, you and I have not talked since George Floyd and all the stuff that's going on in this country right now, where do we stand, from your opinion, as a nation?
Well, again, we really are divided like never before. I don't think before there was a question about challenging the fundamental values upon which we were talking. Back in the 60s, when Dr. King was leading the civil rights movement, we were a challenge. We were fighting for inclusion. We were not fighting for exclusion. I remember I spoke at in Berlin at the University of Munich. And the leftist students expected me to excoriate the country because him, a black man, talking about human rights. And I said the civil rights movement was a movement for inclusion. We weren't fighting to be excluded. And Dr. King was fighting for America to live up to its promise, recognizing that slavery was the country's birth defect, but we were fighting for America to live up to its promise. Well, that has all changed now because of 1619 project with the New York Times that has in fact gone back and challenged this whole notion that America was founded on the basis of equal opportunity for all. And so right now, the fundamental values of the country's capitalism, the nuclear family, all those foundational values are now being challenged, and people are then fracturing along lines of race, of gender. And so we're all now fracturing in, and everybody is being defined as a marginalized group. So we're in a mess right now. But the people, someone said that when bull elephants fight, the grass always loses. In this case, the grass or low-income Blacks are suffering more than any other group in this country. And that's why it is important for us to come together and heal and have as our goal the rebuilding of community, as opposed to just defining our challenges being political, who's winning and who's losing. But I think, Kelly, it's important for us now to come together and decide what kind of nation that we want to be.
You know, your project came under a lot of fire and criticism by the 1619 movement. And how did you address that? And what can your organization do to move forward and heal the land? You talked about bringing people from all sectors of society together and be concerned about the least of these, which would be those low-income Blacks. I know that's been front and center for your campaign to help the poor for many, many years.
Well, first of all, what we're offering isn't another argument against what they're doing. We're talking about an aspirational and an inspirational story. In other words, I say to people, you should, if evaluating which strategy works best, ask yourself, when someone tells you something, what is it that I am able to do that has the consequence of improving my life? That to me should be the test of whether what someone's offering. What we are saying at 1776 is if Black America under slavery, under Jim Crow, were able to build hotels, hospitals, dental schools, businesses, theaters, if we were able to survive and thrive in the midst of when conditions were much worse, then what is preventing us from taking those same strategies and values and applying them today? So what 1776 is doing is we're going back and telling the stories to our Blacks today of what we did back then when conditions were worse, so that people can be inspired. People are inspired to improve themselves when you show them victories that are possible, not constantly remind them of injuries to be avoided. And so we're finding that there are people who are able to rebuild communities even today that reflect the kind of values that our ancestors used to apply. So ours is an upbeat, aspirational, inspirational effort, Kelly, to first of all, we're writing essays, we're looking videos that points to people who were born slaves who died millionaires. How did they do that? And what are the lessons that we can learn? How can we be inspired today to do in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of everything? How can you achieve what constitutes resilience? So that's what we're trying to do, give examples, not arguments. We want to give examples. If we did it then, when white people were at their worst, Blacks were at their best. Well, what does that mean? We want to show examples.
Before we depart today, what would be your message to people in Wisconsin, Kenosha, where we've seen violence inflicted against peaceful protesters, and then we've seen the anger that's erupted into violence and rioting in the wake of Jacob Blake's shooting? And then there's George Floyd, there's Breonna Taylor, there's Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, the list goes on. How do we grow and rebuild our land in the wake of that?
Well, again, I think people are really exploiting. I think we need to just confront some reality. Any death is too many deaths. But the reality is in 2019, that 249 Blacks were killed by police. 165 had guns, 33 had knives, 14 were unarmed. There were 14. And for every one Black that was killed by police, 270 Blacks were killed other Blacks. I'm saying we must give as much attention to the injustice of the 20 children under the age of 10 in Chicago who were murdered in that city. We don't know the names of any of them. Why does Black Lives Matter only when it's taken by a white person?
Bob Woodson, you raise a very good question, my friend, and I appreciate you being on. I look forward to having you again tomorrow. Bob Woodson, founder of the Woodson Center. Appreciate the work that you're doing, sir, to have us all have a discussion about what's going on in America. And thank you for being on the front lines of the civil rights era and struggle, and it still continues today.
Thank you.
We're back with more after this. And welcome back. I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's program, and I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out to watch. I do appreciate each and every one of you. My final word, remembering what Julia Jackson, the mother of Jacob Blake, has stated about moving forward. She stated, America is great when we treat each other greatly. We are the United States of America. The question is, will we become more united or more divided? All of us have to do our part in standing strong to be united, ignited, and righted, to keep spreading not racism, not fear, not hatred, but love, freedom, and peace. Good night.
Take a look around, I tell you what I see. I see a world filled with war and poverty. Take a look around, I'll tell you what I see. I see a world filled with pain and misery. Take a look around, I'll tell you what I see. I see a world filled with race and bigotry. Take a look around, I'll tell you what I see. I see a world filled with hate and hostility. So in the streets we cry, 'cause our babies die from all the guns and the violence. And we lift our hands and raise our demands. But the violence is not silence.